Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you to my History Reaction channel. Today we'll be taking a look at Nubia, Christian Kingdoms in the Heart of Africa by Kings and Generals. As always, I will include a link to the original content in the description down below. Please consider heading over to Kings and Generals and showing them support if you like this video. We do want to encourage them to keep making videos like this. Especially we want to encourage people to make videos about things that are not as widely covered, such as European history, American history. We need to show some of the rest of the world some love too, and that is partly why I chose this particular video. I think Africa deserves a lot more attention than it gets in history discussions. With that said, I thought Nubia and some of the kingdoms in and around Nubia, such as the ancient Kingdom of Kush, parts of Ethiopia, Sudan, all of these are all in the same region. At various times they overlapped each other. This is a very, very important part of world history, and I think it tends to get overlooked way more than it should. So let's take a look at Nubia, the Christian kingdoms in the heart of Africa.
African history is often seen as little more than a footnote in the march of human civilization, an appendage to the supposedly richer tapestries of European and Middle Eastern antiquity.
Which is kind of unfair, because the Nubian kingdoms, the various incarnations of it, were very influential in their time. They were very powerful at certain points in history. There's a period of time where Nubians control Egypt. You have the Nubian Dynasty, I believe it's the 25th, if I'm remembering correctly. They are one of the few Christian kingdoms that resist the Islamic conquest of most of North Africa and this whole region of the world, really. They resist it by far the longest. So, yeah, they're a very important civilization at this time, immensely wealthy at some certain points, very powerful military, and they just tend to get overlooked.
This assessment could not be more wrong. In modern-day Sudan, there are the ruins of once magnificent cathedrals hewn from mud brick, standing amidst the desert sands, remnants of a mighty civilization in the heart of Eastern Africa, which for centuries stood as an enclave of Christendom amidst a sea of Islamic powers.
Indeed it did.
Welcome to our first video on the civilizations of Africa, where we will cover the forgotten kingdoms of Nubia. If you want to learn about the history of Africa, the sponsor of today's video, Blinkist, has you covered. Work towards being your best self in 2021, improve your knowledge, and learn about the world around you with Blinkist. This platform has been incredible for our personal growth and leisure in 2020, as it allowed us to learn and improve on the go and quickly. Blinkist takes the best insights from more than 3,000 non-fiction books and condenses them into 15-minute reads or ready-to-listen audios. The Rift by Alex Perry describes the recent developments on the continent, while China's Second Continent by Howard French describes Chinese efforts to influence Africa. The best thing? You can get offline access to all titles. Recently, Blinkist added full-length audiobooks. Premium subscribers get up to 65% off the regular retail price. Now they've teamed up with popular podcasters to get you to the heart of a podcast episode fast. Learn with us in 2021 by clicking the link in the description. The first 100 people to go to blinkist.com/kingsandgenerals are going to get unlimited access for 1 week to try it out. You'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership. Our story begins on the banks of the Nile River, whose rich silt deposits nurtured the ancient lands of the pyramids and pharaohs. However, the Nile does not stop flowing where ancient Egypt ended, instead snaking south into the heart of Africa.
Okay, that's kind of misleading. I get what they're saying. From the Egyptian perspective, yes, it snakes south into the heart of Africa. But we need to remember that the Nile flows north. So it's not snaking south, it's snaking from the south.
Allowing many other civilizations to thrive upon its shores. The most prominent of these were the Nubians, a people who flourished in what is now Sudan. Around 2500 BC, the first powerful state in Nubia, Kerma, rose to prominence. Running roughly parallel to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, the Nubian people of Kerma were sophisticated agriculturalists, cattle herders, ceramicists, and metal workers. They left behind huge ritualistic tombs known as defufas. Around 1550 BC, the armies of the Egyptian New Kingdom thundered southwards in their war chariots and brought Kerma under their rule.
Yeah, and throughout the history of this part of Africa along the Nile, and I'm talking about down south where Nubia and some of these later kingdoms are going to form, for a long time there's going to be a very close relationship between Egypt and the Nubians, or the Kush, or whatever group we're talking about here. They tend to share culture, they tend to have a lot of similarities, because they do tend to share culture up and down the Nile, religion, all of it.
Egypt ruled over Nubia for roughly 500 years, during which time the Nubian peoples adopted many aspects of Egyptian culture, including the worship of Egyptian gods like Amun and Isis. Despite being under their occupation, the Nubians maintained much internal autonomy and a distinct identity. Egyptian art at the time depicted Nubian nobility with darker skin than their own, bedazzled in large earrings, and draped in robes made of exotic animal skins, making them very distinct from the average Egyptian.
Right.
In the immediate aftermath of the apocalyptic Bronze Age collapse, which devastated all civilization on the eastern Mediterranean, the Nubians were able to reassert their independence, establishing the Kingdom of Kush, with its capital at the Amunic cult center of Napata.
Right.
In the centuries that followed, the Nubians were able to reverse the tides against their former conquerors.
Yeah, so this is the Kingdom of Kush, and you'll hear this referred to in the Bible many times. Depending on the translation of the Bible, sometimes they'll go to translating it as Ethiopians or even Nubians, but mostly when they're talking about these people in the Bible, they're referring to the Kush of this particular period of time. And you're going to have, for example, Moses takes a wife from among the Kush. I don't know if that's, what is her name? Zipporah, I believe. I don't know if it's that wife or if he had it. There's a lot of debate over which wife that would be. But you also get a lot of other references to the Kush. In fact, the name the Kush comes from the son of Ham, who is the son of Noah. So Ham's son is Kush, and that's where the kingdom takes its name from.
It would be around 745 BC that the mighty Kushite king Pie would take advantage of unrest in the north to launch an invasion, occupying Egypt and becoming the first pharaoh of its 25th dynasty. Egypt flourished under Nubian rule, as the Kushite pharaohs oversaw a renaissance in Egyptian art and religion. This included the first widespread construction of pyramids in nearly 2,000 years, both in Egypt proper and in their homeland of Nubia.
Right. In terms of the sheer concentration of pyramids, the high concentration of pyramids is not in Egypt, it's in the Sudan, and that comes from this period of time. That comes from the Kush, the Nubians.
The good times were not to last, however, as in 674 BC, the warlike Assyrians marched down from the Fertile Crescent and after a 90-year struggle, permanently pushed the Kushites out of Egypt and back into Nubia. Kushite civilization continued on after this, with its capital moved to the ancient city of Meroe. Even in their reduced state, the realm remained an economic powerhouse, most prominently as a hub of trade, for they sat at the strategic crossroads between sub-Saharan Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Mediterranean world. Nubian traders peddled luxury goods such as gold, ivory, and ebony, as well as a host of exotic African animals such as wildcats, monkeys, elephants, and giraffes. One can't help but imagine a cheering throng of plebeians in the Circus Maximus of Rome, and wonder if they owed the grim spectacle of the ravenous lions in the sand below to the skilled trappers of Nubia.
Possible, although I believe a lot of the lions from used in the Colosseum came from, I want to say they came from Greece. I could be wrong on that, however. And don't forget, at this period of time, you had a lot of lions in northern Africa as well. You had Barbary lions. I believe you actually had some in Spain, too. But yeah, they did have an extensive trade. They did bring exotic animals up, so it's certainly possible. I don't know enough about that aspect to be really clear. I just seem to remember reading somewhere that a lot of the lions in the gladiatorial games came from the Greek lions.
For centuries longer, the Kingdom of Kush coexisted with a string of foreign dynasties that ruled over their Egyptian neighbors, Persian Achaemenids, Ptolemaic Greeks, and the Roman Empire.
Right.
A brief war was fought with Rome in the 1st century BC, but the Kushites, led by Queen Amanirenas, managed to assert their sovereignty against the legions, establishing the city of Aswan as the border between them and the imperial eagle. However, as Rome grew, it was able to monopolize Mediterranean trade, greatly reducing the Nubians' influence in that trading node.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, the nascent kingdom of Aksum had begun to expand to the southeast at the expense of Kushite territory, pushing the Nubians out of the lucrative Red Sea trade. With Kush in terminal
and Aksum is a pretty important one too. In fact, supposedly it's to Aksum that the Ark of the Covenant is delivered. There are people who believe that it's still there to this day in the city of Aksum.
Decline. The Aksumites would launch a full-scale invasion in around 350 AD, resulting in the final collapse of the ancient kingdom. The Nubian peoples would weather this calamity and consolidate into 3 smaller successor states in Kush's former territory: Nubatia, Makuria, and Alodia. For a time, the fragmented Nubian states would continue to cling on to the bygone days of Kushite glory. Throughout the 5th century, the kings of Nubatia continued to adorn themselves in the royal regalia of their Meroite ancestors and worship their Egyptianized pantheon. However, a new religion would penetrate into the ancient Nubian desert and forever change the cultural fabric of the land.
Yeah, that would be Christianity. Like I said, it can be one of the longest Christian holdouts in this entire region in the face of the spread of Islam.
It is here that the Christian faith is finally introduced to Nubia. By the 4th century AD, Christianity had become the cultural backbone of the Roman Empire. In time, there emerged 5 main ecclesiastical centers of Christianity within.
Let's see if I can get. There can be Rome, there can be Constantinople, there's going to be Alexandria. What are the other 2? What would the other 2 be at this time? I'm coming up blank. I'm gonna kick myself when they reveal them.
In its borders: Rome, Constantinople,
Jerusalem,
Antioch, and Alexandria.
Yeah,
I
feel
Christian
stupid,
through the
obviously.
Alexandrian Church. By the early 6th century, the western half of the empire had fallen, but the Greek-speaking Byzantine half endured and retained control of the wealthy region, becoming the greatest political and cultural powerhouse in the Mediterranean. Nubia had always been malleable to adopting the religions that came out of Egypt. Now, in order to strengthen their economic ties to the powerhouse that was Justinian's Roman Empire, they considered doing so again.
Yeah, I've mentioned this in previous videos, I'll mention it again here. We talk about the Byzantine Empire as kind of a separate empire, but that's a name that we tack onto it. To the people who lived at this time and lived in the Byzantine Empire, they were Romans. They considered themselves Roman, and this was, for them, the Roman Empire.
The Romans in Alexandria sent their priests southwards. The Christianization of the Nubians was complete by 580. And the Kushite temples were converted into churches. The most striking evidence of social change during this era can be observed in the shift in burial rites. Whereas before, Kushite rulers were buried in ornate royal tombs amidst piles of wealth, no such glamour has been found for the monarchs of the Christian era. The deity above now meant more than any worldly king. For roughly a century, the kingdoms of Christian Nubia enjoyed a period of prosperity. Wealth from eastern Rome flowed down the Nile into their lands, and with it, cultural influence. Greek emerged as the dominant language among the Nubian.
They said down the Nile. Technically, again, it's up the Nile. The Nile flows from the south to the north.
Aristocracy and clergy. It was around this time that the Kingdom of Makuria absorbed Nubatia, becoming the predominant power in the region. However, across the Red Sea, a new faith was about to be born, and with it, a new era. By the time of Muhammad's death in 632, the young faith of Islam had spread firmly across the entirety of Arabia. Immediately afterwards, the Rashidun Caliphate stormed out of its homeland as some of the most efficient conquerors in world history. By 641, the armies of the Caliph Umar had seized Egypt. All of a sudden, the kingdoms of Nubia found themselves isolated from the rest of Christianity. Knowing the Nubians to be a dangerous power to leave unchecked, the Rashiduns immediately attacked the ancient land of Kush. In 642, the Arab general
and they're not going to have any success for quite a long time. In fact, it's not going to be until the Crusades that they finally make some ground against Nubia.
Uqba ibn Nafi led a column of 20,000 horsemen into Mercuria. Initially uncontested, they proceeded towards the capital city of Dongola. The Muslims had vanquished the mighty Sassanid Persians and even brought the Romans to heel. So what was there to fear from Balad as-Sudan, the land of the black-skinned people? And yet, as they approached the Mercurian capital, their foe finally emerged like a desert mirage, arrow points gleaming beneath the scorching sun. At the first Battle of Dongola, the deadly aim of 10,000 Nubian marksmen was able to inflict between 10,000 and 15,000 deaths on the unsuspecting Arabic horsemen. Ibn Nafi's army was eviscerated, and the Arabs were forced to retreat. They returned in 652 with a new army and siege weapons in tow, but were once more defeated in a pitched battle outside the mud brick walls of Dongola. After this setback, the Muslim rulers of Egypt and the king of Mercuria came together and brokered a peace treaty. This pact was stipulated on an annual exchange.
This is one of the longest holding treaties in history. I believe it lasts for, I want to say, almost 600 years.
Of goods. The Mercurians would export 360 slaves to Egypt per year, while the Egyptians would provide wheat, textiles, and other essential goods to the Mercurians. Additionally, both parties would allow safe passage for each other's citizens in the other's lands, and the Mercurians would maintain a mosque in their kingdom for the use of Muslim visitors. The Pact Treaty was a remarkable milestone. Firstly, it confirmed that the Nubians were the only ones who had successfully fended off the early Arabic invasions. Secondly, although no one knew it at the time, the Pact would turn out to be one of the longest-lasting diplomatic treaties in human history. It is during the long era of Pact that we have the most archaeological and literary records of medieval Nubian culture. So let us take a brief pause from the march of history to paint a picture of what Nubian society looked like during this time. Christianity was integral to every level of Nubian society. The king of Mercuria traditionally also held the role of priest and was capable of performing mass. 6 major cathedral sites have been uncovered by modern archaeologists, the best preserved being located at Faris and Casa Ibrim. Additionally, hundreds of smaller churches have been found across the land. Although Egypt was ruled by Muslims, there remained a thriving protected class of Christians known as the Copts. These people were the descendants of the ancient Egyptians and practiced a vibrant brand of Orthodox Christianity. From the 8th to 14th centuries, the church in Nubia took its cues from the Coptic church. The two worked hand in hand, and most bishops in Nubia were ethnic Copts appointed from Egypt. However, unlike the Copts, who used their native Egyptian tongue to perform church services,
the Nubians initially they used Greek.
The Nubians continued to use Greek as their liturgical language, remarkably so, as at that point they had been severed from regular contact with Eastern Rome for centuries. In later centuries, the indigenous Nubian language was incorporated into religious texts as well, written using a modified version of the Greek alphabet. For the average medieval Nubian, daily life was not unlike that of their Kushite ancestors. Society was overwhelmingly rural, composed of many little hamlets dotted along the fertile banks of the Nile, which farmed sorghum, millet, wheat, and barley as they had for millennia.
It's really important to understand the Nile is a breadbasket for a lot of the Mediterranean. Typically, we think of Egypt as being the breadbasket. I mean, that's one reason Rome wanted it and fought so hard to control Egypt, was because it was such good farmland. But that extends up the Nile as well, all the way up into this region. And yeah, great for farming.
The only striking difference from their pagan ancestors was how they expressed their faith. In every village, the church was the center of community life. Additionally, medieval Nubian peasants decorated the insides of their houses with protective biblical inscriptions. Many wore irigabs, locket-like leather amulets, within which a piece of scripture had been carefully sewn up inside. Medieval Nubia was a fairly egalitarian society. Women could own and transfer property independently and enjoyed great political power.
I want to say they were matrilineal. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they were. A lot of the kingdoms in this region were.
As the royal succession of Nubian kings was matrilineal, so queen mothers were revered. Literacy was also encouraged amongst both sexes, and women sometimes served dignified positions as court scribes. On top of being sophisticated literati, Nubians were excellent craftsmen, producing many skilled textile weavers, carpenters, and potters. Indeed, southern ceramics were widely considered to be of better quality than their Egyptian counterparts,
Take that,
and
Egypt.
were a common export in trade. The Nubians were fine artists as well. This was most prominently displayed in the interior of their churches, which were lovingly painted with ornate murals depicting winged angels, biblical prophets, and prominent Nubian kings and queens in luxurious robes. For centuries, the Christian kingdoms of Nubia enjoyed an era of prosperity, predicated on their unprecedentedly long and stable peace with the Islamic world. In 833, King Zacharias III of Mercuria even managed to send his son Gorgias to Baghdad, where he successfully bartered down the annual Nubian slave tribute to a third of its original amount. However, as remarkably long as it endured, the peace of the Bakht era would not last forever. Between the 7th and 12th centuries, power in Egypt had passed between various different Muslim dynasties, and each one had continued the tradition of peace with Nubia. This, however, would change with the ascension of the slave soldiers turned sultans of the Mamluk dynasty. Over time, the practice of sending slaves northwards, as stipulated in the Bakht, had long since ceased in favor of the exchange of other goods.
I didn't know that.
When the Mamluk Sultanate came to power in Cairo in 1250, they aggressively demanded the slave tribute not only be reinstituted, but an amount of slaves equal to the number of annual payments missed were to be immediately sent northwards was unacceptable to the Mercurians, and before long, armed conflict had escalated. This officially ended the Bakht, which endured for 600 years. One potential reason for the Mamluk aggression on Nubia could be because the Crusades were in full swing at the time, and as European knights penetrated into the Islamic
you don't want to have another Christian kingdom down there at your back.
World, they became increasingly aware of their long-lost co-religionists in the desert.
Exactly.
The Mamluks' warlike policy was therefore a likely effort to subjugate them before they could form an alliance with their fellow Christians and attack Islamic Egypt from two fronts. Mercuria saw some initial successes in the war that followed. In 1265, they survived a large-scale Mamluk raid, and in 1272 they struck back. Led by their king David, the Nubians destroyed the port town of Aidab, a crucial stop on a pilgrimage route to Mecca. 3 years later, they scored another victory, razing the city of Aswan, which for centuries had been a peaceful trading hub between Christians and Muslims.
Aswan ringed a bell to me. There's something important about Aswan, but I'm not remembering what it is. Sorry.
Thoroughly incensed,
I'm going to pause here and take a look. And for some reason that name is... Okay, I looked up Aswan to see why it was ringing bells for me. It's actually because I was recently I'm still working actually on a project about catastrophic flooding, both historical and potential future problem with catastrophic flooding. And the Aswan Dam is an embankment dam in this region. It's one of the largest in the world. And if it ever fails, you do not want to be downriver from this if it ever fails. If you're familiar with the Johnstown flood that occurred in Pennsylvania, imagine that only 10 times more catastrophic or more. So that's why I was remembering it, because it came up in some research I was doing. Anyway, let's continue.
The Mamluks levied an army in Cairo in 1276 and marched south, winning 3 decisive victories against the Makurians, sacking Dongola, then capturing and executing King David. After that, Makuria fell into a steep decline. As power dynamics in the region shifted drastically, the royal family fell victim to infighting, with various factions looking to win over Mamluk benefactors to gain the throne, putting the independence of the kingdom at risk. In 1317, the Mamluks were able to install a Muslim ruler, Saif al-Din Abdullah, onto the Makurian throne, and the Great Throne Hall of Dongola was converted into a mosque. While the general population did not convert to Islam, it was still a heavy blow to Christian Nubia. In the following decades, the situation would continue to spiral as the bubonic plague devastated communities across the Upper Nile, and warlike Bedouin tribesmen crossed the Red Sea, inflicting devastation upon Nubian lands. In 1365, a brutal civil war resulted in Dongola being destroyed, abandoned, and overrun by foreign tribes, thus reducing the...
That's one of the big dangers of civil war, is you open yourself up to invasion from other countries that see you being weakened.
The once mighty kingdom of Makuria to an irrelevant rump state, controlling a roughly 100-kilometer strip of the Nile River around the town of Addo. The southern Nubian kingdom of Alodia was not faring any better. Its capital Soba was sacked and destroyed during this time, either by the Bedouins or by the Funj Sultanate, which had taken advantage of the decline to expand into the region. Nubian society utterly collapsed in this era. What remained of their governments descended into anarchy, the Nubian church ceased to exist as an organized entity, while Nubian literature and art completely disappeared from the historical record. Some semblance of an independent African Christianity would linger on in the Upper Nile until the early 16th century, before finally being snuffed out through a process of Islamification and Arabization. When the Ottoman Empire expanded into Nubia in the 1560s, they found no traces of an organized Christian society remaining in the region, marking the end of an era that had lasted for over a millennium. Despite the collapse of their kingdoms, the Nubians themselves have persevered into the modern day.
Yep.
Although now predominantly practicing Sunni Islam, they have managed to keep their traditional languages and many aspects of their indigenous culture alive. As the Nubian people look back on over 4,000 years of a proud, rich history, we too should all remember that in the heart of the African continent exists a legacy of rich and mighty kingdoms, and when it comes to the lesser-known regions of world history, there is always more than meets the eye.
Well said, well said.
More videos on the African kingdoms are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button.
Yes.
Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely.
Yeah, let's support our original content creators, especially the ones who are brave enough to tackle less known or less mainstream topics that probably aren't going to get as many views as something like Napoleon or the world wars or that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's the case with kings and generals. They've been around a while. They've done well for themselves. But we really want to encourage people to make more videos like this that touch on some of the lesser known parts of history or the less emphasized parts. Because, yeah, you see the Kush, which is part of this, all through the Bible. And yet most people have no idea who the Kush were or how powerful or prominent they were during their time. So I think this is really something that we need to talk more about. Anyway, thank you for joining me. I hope to see you all for whatever video we end up doing next. Until then, bye-bye.